This research was based on readiness assessment for Industry 4.0 in Sri Lankan apparel industry. Through this presentation, the background of the research, scope of the research, objectives, methodology, systematic review of literature, development of evaluation criteria, findings and discussion, and finally the conclusion is going to be discussed. Sri Lanka's apparel industry is the most significant and driving contributor for the country's economy by employing a labor force over 990,000 and contributing over $5 billion to GDP. This industry has achieved rapid growth rates over the past 4 decades despite the increase in competition and a rapidly evolving global marketplace for apparel. Apparel is a human-centric industry, and that is a challenge for a small country like Sri Lanka when compared to other regional players. Labor shortages and the record number of labor turnover can be identified as the major challenges in the current apparel industry in Sri Lanka. As a result of that, these companies have been left with the option of automating some of their processes and for being sustainable. It seems that the apparel manufacturers are in the first step of converting their plants into smart factories. Therefore, the apparel industry is likely to get the benefit of Industry 4.0 for most of the processes in the apparel value chain. The fourth industrial revolution is the current trend of automation and data exchange in manufacturing technologies, including cyber physical systems, the Internet of Things, big data, autonomous robots, simulation, system integration, cybersecurity, cloud computing, additive manufacturing, and augmented reality. Industry 4.0 empowers the business with better control of the operation and allows leveraging real-time data to enhance productivity, improve processes, and drive growth. Industry 4.0 design principles make the guidelines clearer for organizations who wish to implement Industry 4.0 practically. According to industry experts' analysis, it shows that when implementing Industry 4.0 in real-world enterprise environments, the problems such as lack of strategic guidance, perception about highly complex Industry 4.0 concepts, uncertainty about outcomes of Industry 4.0 applications in the matter of benefits and cost, failure to assess Industry 4.0 capability, and readiness of the company comes into view. So this is the point where readiness assessment models are important. Readiness assessment uses a predetermined set of indicators to understand their present capabilities and gaps, which will enable firms to prepare feasible strategies and plans to move towards Industry 4.0. The scope of this research based on Industry 4.0 readiness assessment models Sri Lankan apparel industry. The research problem is how to assess the current level of readiness for Industry 4.0 in the apparel value chain processes in Sri Lankan apparel companies to guide themselves to reach a higher maturity stage in a standardized manner to acquire the applications of Industry 4.0. This paper tried to find answers for the questions: what are the major challenges that Sri Lankan apparel industry facing that make barriers for continuous growing in quality and productivity? What are the innovative applications of Industry 4.0 in apparel industry that improve processes in apparel value chain to deliver value-added products? How to evaluate the existing readiness assessment models in the context of Industry 4.0 to find the strengths and weaknesses. How to assess the current levels of readiness. The processes of apparel value chain in Sri Lankan apparel companies are positioned to reach a higher readiness stage to acquire the applications of Industry 4.0. The objectives have been identified according to the problems that have defined before. The expected outcomes of this research are systematic review of literature on the innovative applications of Industry 4.0, where practitioners find assistance in implementing appropriate scenarios in apparel industry, and academics are enabled to further investigate about subject area. Analysis on existing Industry 4.0 readiness assessment models, and also evaluation criteria to evaluate the existing Industry 4.0 readiness assessment models to find the strengths and weaknesses. Finally, the systematic evaluation of existing readiness assessment models and gaps identification. The methodology of this research was based on systematic review of literature suggested by these two studies. At first, through keyword searching, using the keywords challenges in Sri Lankan apparel industry, Industry 4.0 manufacturing, industrial internet, smart factory, components of Industry 4.0, applications of Industry 4.0 in apparel industry, Industry 4.0 readiness model, Industry 4.0 maturity model, Industry 4.0 readiness, and cyber physical system readiness. Altogether, 87 articles were identified. Finally, 58 articles were remained for qualitative synthesis, and they were classified and analyzed in Microsoft Excel spreadsheet as a reference database. Systematic review of literature was conducted to identify the challenges in Sri Lankan apparel industry, innovative applications for Industry 4.0 for apparel industry, and existing readiness assessment models of their strengths and weaknesses in order to identify the gap that exists for a new readiness assessment model for Sri Lankan apparel industry. The challenges of Sri Lankan apparel industry have been identified as lack of solid raw material base, productivity of labor, wage differentials, where cost of labor is about 15 to 16% of the total cost of production. And also overwastage, lead time, lack of skilled labor, where 8% vacancies in managerial grades are available due to a lack of suitable persons, and 94% of the total workforce are operational category, and 90% are female employees, and most of them leave the industry after their marriage. And also insufficient product diversification, labor shortage, as well as heavy dependence on few large-scale industries also can be identified as challenges in Sri Lankan apparel industry. The components of Industry 4.0 identified according to the literature review are augmented reality, additive manufacturing, cybersecurity, cloud computing, autonomous robots, simulation, Internet of Things, big data, and system integration. The innovative approaches that can be formed by the fourth industrial revolution in the clothing and apparel industry have been proposed as a conceptual smart apparel factory called Apparel 4.0. With the innovative applications of Industry 4.0, additive manufacturing enables customers to have their own virtual identity for clothing and the ability to specify the cloth that would like to have. And also artificial intelligence can be applied in various processes of apparel production such as fiber grading, prediction of yarn properties, fabric fault analysis, dye recipe prediction, and finally for supply chain management. Big data analytics enable to predict possible device or equipment failures and to define a maintenance strategy accordingly to decrease the failure rate and increase device utilization and overall equipment effectiveness. Simulation methods can yield numerous benefits: identification of manufacturing bottlenecks to increase throughput, identification of cost-saving opportunities such as optimization of direct and indirect labor, and validation of expected performance of new value streams. 10 existing readiness assessment models have been identified and have summarized their strengths and weaknesses. Since there isn't any standard methodology to evaluate readiness assessment models, an evaluation criteria was identified based on literature and key points that need to be included in a standardized assessment model. Since degree of accomplishment of these criteria are different for each model, a Likert scale was introduced to evaluate the existing models in a systematic manner. This matrix shows the systematic evaluation of the existing Industry 4.0 readiness assessment models and Industry 4.0 maturity assessment models. It shows that most of the models have not accomplished the several criteria and only few models have been fully accomplished some of the criteria. According to the analysis, it shows many weaknesses and drawbacks where it motivates for development of a new Industry 4.0 readiness assessment model. Those weaknesses and drawbacks are only a few readiness assessment models for manufacturing industry, only focus on enterprise-wide dimensions on top management's level, haven't elaborated the attributes of cross-selectional and sub-dimensions deeper, do not contain upcoming steps within a certain roadmap to move up higher maturity levels, haven't proved practicability and usefulness in an enterprise environment, haven't provided further information on aspect dimensions and creation process, haven't fully elaborated sector-wide solutions such as apparel, automotive, food, technology, corporate culture, strategy and leadership, IT readiness dimensions are the most popular dimensions among these models. Thus, there is a need for understanding the key dimensions to assess the readiness for implementing Industry 4.0 from a holistic perspective. As a result of the systematic evaluation, it is concluded that none of the models have been fully accomplished any of these criteria. Finally, it is concluded that there is a research gap in that domain and need for a standardized readiness assessment model for Industry 4.0 customized for apparel industry readiness measurement purposes remain valid. Since this is an ongoing research, as future work, it has been planned to develop a readiness assessment model for apparel industry which fulfill the existing gaps identified through this study, and the model will be validated through industry experts, and then after that through preparing questionnaires and interviewing stakeholders in cross-level and cross-functional basics, the data will be collected, and through that data analyzing the readiness assessment of apparel value chain processes in particular company and apparel manufacturing companies, and finally the readiness assessment of Sri Lankan apparel industry can be find out in order to guide them to move up a higher readiness level. Thank you.